Good morning. My name's Alan. I'm the worship coordinator here and don't usually do this. But I wanted to give you a short little bio here, telling you first and foremost that this has been kind of coming into my face for quite a while, and I didn't know if I'd ever find a time or the strength or the courage to be before you today. But I have to be honest, when I heard Mandy preach this spring, right up there, and the journey that she was taking to share some very profound words that day, I will have to let you know, I began to say, maybe God, if this time arises, maybe I'll say, here am I. Well, here am I today. Just a little bit of a bio, though. I did, my wife Sherry and I have been here for quite a while. I actually started coming here during Texas's time, when my work at that time allowed me to be here on Sundays. Got my music degree a few years ago from a place called Central Methodist. Got a seminary degree a few decades ago from a place called St. Paul. Was under the appointed process for 14 years, and 30 years ago felt that other channels, other opportunities we were being led to. No regrets. No regrets. Especially grateful for the opportunity to be here with you today. My confession to you is that for the last several decades, I rarely have been a pulpit preacher. I prefer to be able to have it a little bit more like a time of a visit, of sharing together, of having together this time and letting it be that which we can receive together as we all grow in that effort of spirit. But I do want to go back to you about, 10 plus years ago, because at that time, my wife Sherry and I did not live in this area. We lived in a town called Branson. Ever heard of Branson? In a place, we worked at a place called Silver Dollar City. Now, my wife, during this time of year, would have been dressed in referee costume as she was an usher for the theater where the Harlem Globetrotters did several shows a day. I did not wear a referee's costume. They had me in tails, boots, a top hat, and this cane over here, as I was the parson, the minister of the Wilderness Church. That little church holds a whopping 50 people, and it's packed. It was built literally in 1850 and moved to the park when the park began, and they still had those wooden benches that were construed together in 1850, and those who chose to go sat on original furniture. You felt it by the time it was over. But we did 4 services every Sunday morning. 2 for the employees before the park opened, 2 for the guests when the park opened. And that place was filled to the brim every time. People chose to come. This is a holiday weekend, and yet you chose to be here, and I'm grateful. I will confess to you that in the time we were in the appointed system, you weren't going to see the Edwards family, us and our 2 little kids, on those 2 holidays, Memorial Day and Labor Day. Those were good weekends for us to be away. So our prayers and our love continue for Tino and his family, and I promise you this, one thing you can do each and every day is surround Tino and his entire family with the peace and the guidance and the patience and the care that he needs and that they need to be shepherds of this flock. I can assure you, under the appointed system, that it becomes quite a lonely place many times. But about 12 years ago, on Holy Week time in the spring, before the park opened, all in the 7 days a week, we got a chance to go to church ourselves, and particularly in Holy Week. I was the only minister I knew that served a church on Easter Sunday that was closed. And during Holy Week, we got a chance to go to the services that the United Methodist Church of Branson would share in worship. A minister by the name of Ross was there. I think someone here may know him a little bit. Well, we enjoyed being with him so much, and I got a text from him early in the week of Holy Week. Would I be willing to provide the liturgy for the Maundy Thursday service at the Branson Church? But alas, the phone did not say liturgy. You see, especially years ago, these things had what they called word banks with them. And if you said a word that wasn't in the vast vocabulary that the word bank would have, it would take your word, try to figure out by maybe the first couple of letters what you intended to say, and send that in the text. Now, liturgy, if you understand, you know what Dr. Bird, Dr. Antonio here is doing so well, is helping with all the rudiments of the church so that there is that flow going on that whole time. So I was ready to do the liturgy, but that's not what the phone asked me to do. Remember liturgy, L-I-T-U-R-G-Y. Take the first couple of letters. Would you consider bringing the liquor for this Thursday night service? Sure. And then I texted, are you sure this is what you want? And then the word bank was quite clear that that was not the intention Ross had had. You know, I think I've heard the Sermon on the Mount so many times that if I got paid $1 for every time it was coming about, I'd probably have a pretty good retirement by now. But it was only in the most recent of times, regrettably, that in reading it and rereading it, the context of that entire passage of those 3 chapters of Matthew were kind of enlightened. Because Jesus saw the crowds. But unlike today, when a person could literally stand in a stadium or an amphitheater or something and have the sound system do everything that it needed to do, that ain't how it was back then. He saw the crowd. And in those, he saw those poor in spirit, mourning, hungry, thirsty. But who did he talk this to? The disciples came to him. And he set them down. And this is what he shared to his disciples. Why did he share it to them? Because first of all, he knew that they would be the ones commissioned in time. He trusted them. In spite of flaws, in spite of themselves at times, he trusted them so that they would be able to take his message forward. He knew that in their own ways they were poor. They would mind, they mourned, they struggled. But he also knew in spite of everything, there was a hunger and thirst inside of them that was so deep and so strong that as they spent time with him, then they could share to those crowds that we were promised long ago that whenever the message of the gospel was brought forward, that the people would hear, the people would have a chance to hear, and that their lives could have a place and a purpose and a direction for them. So he taught them, he set them down, and line by line, one by one, blessed are, blessed are, blessed are. Then it was up to them to take the next step. You have that which is inside of you. What do you choose to do with it now? We actually answer that question every day with our faith. We answer that day with our schedules, with our lives, with our circumstances, the things we decide to do, the things we choose to avoid. What is our next step? When I pastored churches and we would go through, shall we say, interesting committee meetings, and you felt like everything was just overwhelming for them. They were unsure. They were not completely convinced that this could work. We were sure that, here's what we think we need to do. I would always try to share with them, what is your next step? We didn't need to go all the way today, but we weren't going to get anywhere near where we needed to be until we took the next step. And how we defined it in the church, how we defined it in our families, how we defined it in our lives, all came together through our ability to say we are willing to take that next step. Now, when I worked at Silver Dollar City, if you've ever been there, there's hills. There's a cave and all of this stuff that you have to do to get around there. But during my times when we weren't doing music programs or the worship services, I was walking the park. Not everybody who walks the park wears a top hat, long coat, and also has this. I was able to go up and down those hills primarily because of this. And it got me going, even on those hills where the next step seemed like it was going to be a hard one to take. 12 years ago, one of the shows that Sherry at that time was overseeing was a high wire act by the guy's name was Nick Walinda. He was in the news 12 years ago because in addition to working at Silver Dollar City, where he and his family would do a high wire act in the theater, go ahead, Chiago. He decided he was going to walk over Niagara Falls. And in June of 2012, he left Branson, got hold of his passport, because when he walked from the United States over into Canada, he had to have a passport. But can you see him there in the middle? Do you see how big the falls is around him and how little he is there? If you pull his name up online, you're going to see great big pictures of him that I'm sure you have been photoshopped. This is more close to the dimensions that's there. The falls which would never quit, and Nick Walinda walking a high wire without a protection cable, by the way, beside him. And the only thing he was doing was holding a very long stick that helped him keep his balance, one by one by one. Took him 25 minutes to cross the falls. And the moment he got to the Canadian side, passport, please. But he was there, and he arrived. And the whole point was he had to focus on the next step each and every time. I don't know all the things that are creating your hungers and your thirsts. You may not understand them all. I'm just like those falls that I can promise you are flowing constantly, completely, never ending. You feel that way sometimes in your own heart and in your own circumstances, that it's never going away. If you look at the falls, you fall, hence the word. If you think about the next step, you walk. Doesn't mean that next step takes you all the way, but it takes you further than you were. So I invite you in this day to ask, what is my next step? For yourself, for your home and family, for this church, for the future. As you are willing to take the next step, please know you will be fulfilled, and that there is never any step you ever take alone.